In 2004, the entire population of Mercy Children's Home in rural Anhui Province vanished overnight. 156 children, 23 staff members gone without explanation. No bodies were found, no ransom demands, no signs of struggle. The official report claimed they were evacuated due to a severe landslide threat, but no relocation records existed of where they went. For 20 years, the abandoned building sat empty, its red-painted doors sealed with government warnings, surrounded by bamboo groves that grew unnaturally thick around the property. The three-story brick structure seemed to repel visitors. Locals avoided the area entirely, whispering about strange sounds echoing from within on moonless nights. Children's laughter that had no source, voices speaking in dialects that predated modern Chinese. Then in 2024, urban explorer Wei Ming broke through a boarded window and discovered something that made him call police immediately. A hidden door behind a false wall in the basement, sealed with ancient talismans and warning symbols carved deep into the wood. Inside, he found dozens of small wooden coffins arranged in precise patterns, each containing not bodies but clay figurines carved to look like children, along with documentation written in both Mandarin and an unknown script that seemed to shift when not directly observed. Detective Li Mei was 2 hours into her morning shift when Wei Ming stumbled through the doors of the rural police station, his hands shaking as he clutched a manila folder filled with photographs. She looked up from the paperwork scattered across her desk, missing livestock reports, minor property disputes, the usual quiet problems of a county where nothing significant ever happened. Wei Ming couldn't have been older than 25, wearing urban exploration gear still covered in dust and cobwebs. His face was pale, the kind of pallor that came from seeing something fundamentally wrong with the world. He approached the front desk where Sergeant Zhou was finishing a phone call about a broken streetlight. "I need to report something," Wei Ming said, his voice barely steady. "At the old orphanage, Mercy Children's Home, I found something that shouldn't exist." Li Mei's pen stopped moving across the page. Mercy Children's Home. She hadn't heard that name spoken aloud in years, though it haunted her thoughts daily. The place where her 8-year-old sister had supposedly been transferred to another facility, never to be seen again. Wei Ming opened his folder and spread photographs across the counter. Polaroids taken with flash, showing a cramped underground chamber lined with wooden coffins, each small enough for a child. But instead of bodies, each coffin contained intricately carved clay figurines. The detail was extraordinary. Each figure had individual facial features, clothing, even tiny accessories. Li Mei stood up so quickly, her chair rolled backward. She moved to the counter, studying the images with growing unease. The craftsmanship was too precise, too personal. These weren't mass-produced items. Each figurine had been carefully sculpted to represent a specific child. "Where exactly did you find this?" she asked, trying to keep her voice professional. Wei Ming pointed to one of the photos showing the hidden door itself. "Basement level, east wing. There's this wall that looks normal, but the mortar was different, newer. When I broke through, I found this chamber behind it." "How many figurines are there?" Li Mei asked, though she dreaded the answer. "I counted 156. Wei Ming said quietly. "Each one is different. Each one has a number carved into the base, along with dates. Most of the dates are from 2004. Li Mei felt her chest tighten. 156 figurines. 156 children had vanished from Mercy Children's Home. But, as she studied the photographs more carefully, one detail made her blood run cold. In the corner of one image, partially visible, was a figurine wearing what appeared to be a tiny jade bracelet. Her sister had worn an identical bracelet, a family heirloom she'd refused to remove even when the orphanage staff insisted. Li Mei had given it to her the day before the supposed transfer, promising they'd see each other again soon. "Did you take any of the actual figurines?" Li Mei asked. Wei Ming shook his head. "I didn't want to disturb anything. But there's more." He pulled out his final photograph. "There's a stone staircase leading down from the chamber, deeper underground, and I could hear something coming from down there." "What kind of something?" "Voices, children's voices, whispering in unison, speaking words I've never heard before, but somehow they sounded familiar, like a language I used to know but forgot." Li Mei examined the photograph of the staircase. The stone looked ancient, far older than the orphanage above. The steps descended into complete darkness, and even in the photo, there was something unsettling about that darkness. It seemed too deep, too absolute. "I'm going out there," she said, the words coming out before she'd fully decided to say them. "You're going to show me exactly where you found this chamber," she told Wei Ming, who nodded quickly. Though something strange flickered in his eyes' relief, mixed with an emotion she couldn't identify. Chapter 2. The drive to the orphanage took 30 minutes through winding mountain roads that seemed to grow narrower and more overgrown with each mile. Li Mei had made this drive countless times in the years following her sister's disappearance, but she'd never been inside the building itself. It had been sealed by government order immediately after the evacuation, declared structurally unsound despite having been built only 15 years earlier. As they approached the property, Li Mei noticed how the bamboo groves pressed close to the building, their density unnatural. The three-story brick structure with traditional Chinese architectural elements looked exactly as Li Mei remembered from childhood visits, though now the paint was faded and peeling. Wei Ming led her around to the side of the building where he'd gained entry. The boards over one window had been pried away, revealing broken glass and a dark interior. They climbed through into what had once been the orphanage's main hallway. The smell hit Li Mei immediately, not just mold and decay, but something else. Incense, old and stale, mixed with something organic that made her stomach turn. Their flashlight beams revealed a hallway lined with peeling paint and water-stained walls. Children's artwork still clung to bulletin boards. The colors faded, but the innocent drawings somehow making the abandonment more heartbreaking. As they walked deeper into the building, Li Mei noticed details that seemed wrong. Scratches along the walls at child height, too deep and extensive to be from normal wear. Doors that had been barricaded from the inside. Furniture piled against them as if to keep something out or in. The basement door stood open, revealing wooden stairs that descended into absolute darkness. The smell was stronger here, that mixture of incense and decay that made Li Mei's eyes water. Wei Ming navigated the basement with disturbing confidence, leading Li Mei through twists and turns until they reached what appeared to be a solid concrete wall. "Here," he said, pointing to a section where the wall had been broken open. The hole was roughly 3 feet square, just large enough for a person to crawl through. Li Mei shined her light into the space beyond and saw exactly what Wei Ming had photographed, a chamber lined with small wooden coffins, each containing a clay figurine. But now, seeing it in person, Li Mei noticed details the photographs hadn't captured. The figurines weren't just carved, they were perfect representations of specific children. And they weren't randomly arranged. They formed precise patterns around a central altar. "Jesus," Li Mei whispered, climbing through the opening. Inside the chamber, the smell of incense was overwhelming. Li Mei moved to the altar at the center. The stone was dark with stains that could have been centuries old. Carved into its surface were symbols that combined traditional Chinese characters with something far more ancient script that seemed to predate any known written language. "Wei Ming, look at this," she called, but when she turned around, he was gone. Li Mei was alone in the chamber with 156 clay children. And from somewhere deeper in the darkness beyond a stone staircase, she could hear exactly what Wei Ming had described: children's voices whispering in unison, speaking words in a language that felt familiar despite being impossible to understand. As she stood at the top of the stairs, Li Mei heard something that made her heart stop, a voice calling her name, a voice she recognized, though she hadn't heard it in 20 years. Her sister's voice, exactly as it had sounded when she was 8 years old, calling for help from somewhere in the darkness below. Chapter 3. The staircase descended much further than should have been possible. Li Mei counted over 100 steps before she reached the bottom, which would have put her far below the foundation of the orphanage. The walls here were different, not concrete, but carved stone covered in symbols that seemed to move when caught in her peripheral vision. The air grew colder with each step, carrying whispers that sounded like prayers spoken in reverse. The corridor at the bottom stretched in both directions, impossibly long and lit by a dim, sourceless light that shouldn't have existed. The illumination seemed to emanate from the carved symbols themselves, pulsing with a rhythm that matched Li Mei's heartbeat. She followed the sound of her sister's voice, which seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once, echoing off walls that appeared to breathe. She discovered chambers branching off the main corridor, each containing different arrangements of artifacts and symbols. The first room she entered made her stomach lurch. Hundreds of journals were stacked floor to ceiling, written in multiple hands that ranged from careful, scholarly script to desperate, shaking scrawls. The entries documented decades of rituals and ceremonies, but as Li Mei read deeper, she realized the documentation went back much further. Some pages were written on parchment that crumbled at her touch, others on rice paper that should have disintegrated long ago. The entries spoke of opening the gates and feeding the hungry dark. of children being prepared for something called the Great Convergence. One journal, bound in what looked like human skin, contained detailed drawings of the ritual chamber above and maps of underground passages that extended for miles beneath the mountain. The final entry, dated the day before the orphanage evacuation, was written in what appeared to be blood. The children are ready. The alignment approaches. May our sacrifice bridge the void between worlds. In another chamber, Li Mei found evidence that the orphanage hadn't been the beginning of whatever had happened here. Ancient bronze vessels sat on stone pedestals, their surfaces green with age and covered in symbols that predated any Chinese writing system she recognized. The carved symbols on the walls were far older than the building above, depicting creatures that defied description, beings with too many limbs, eyes like black holes, and mouths that seemed to contain infinite darkness. Clay tablets scattered across stone tables contained records in multiple languages, ancient Chinese, but also scripts that looked Tibetan, Sanskrit, and others she couldn't identify. One tablet, when she held her flashlight close, revealed carvings that seemed to move and shift, showing what appeared to be a timeline of rituals stretching back over 1,000 years. The ritual chambers had been in use for centuries before the first child ever set foot in Mercy Children's home. But it was in the deepest chamber that Li Mei found what she was looking for and what she was afraid to find. The circular room was vast, its domed ceiling disappearing into shadows that her flashlight couldn't penetrate. Carved into the floor was an intricate mandala pattern inlaid with what looked like silver and obsidian, forming geometric shapes that hurt to look at directly. At the center of this pattern, her sister sat cross-legged, aged to adulthood but wearing the same pink dress and tiny white shoes she'd disappeared in 20 years ago. Around her sat 22 other figures and were clearly former staff members, recognizable despite 2 decades of supernatural aging. Others appeared to be children who had grown into adults in this liminal space, their faces holding an unsettling mixture of innocence and ancient wisdom. Their eyes held the same empty, timeless quality as her sister's, but Li Mei could see intelligence flickering behind the void. Li Mei, her sister said, and her voice was exactly as Li Mei remembered it, though it came from the throat of a woman in her late 20s. I've been waiting for you to come home. Li Mei approached slowly, her flashlight revealing that her sister and the others weren't quite solid. They existed in the space, but not entirely in the same reality as everything else. When she moved her light, their shadows fell in directions that defied the laws of physics, and sometimes she could see through them to the carved walls behind. Xiaoling, Li Mei whispered, using her sister's childhood nickname, what happened to you? Her sister Xiaoling smiled, and for a moment she looked exactly as she had at 8 years old. We were chosen, she replied, all of us, the children from the orphanage, the staff, even Director Chen who sits behind you now. Li Mei spun around to see a middle-aged woman in a nurse's uniform, her face kind but her eyes reflecting that same infinite emptiness. We were prepared to serve as bridges between the world above and the world below, Xiaoling continued. The rituals were supposed to open a controlled gateway, allowing limited communication between realities, but something went wrong during the final ceremony. The gateway opened too wide, and we became trapped between both worlds, unable to move forward or back. Li Mei noticed that the chamber walls were covered in scratches and messages, desperate pleas carved by fingernails and makeshift tools. Unlike the messages she'd seen upstairs, these were ransom still had flakes of dried blood around the edges. As she read them, her blood ran cold. Day 7412, still conscious, still trapped. The voices are getting louder. Li Mei, if you find this, don't trust them completely. How long have you been conscious down here? Li Mei asked, though she dreaded the answer. Time moves differently here, Xiaoling said, her voice taking on an otherworldly quality. Sometimes it feels like 20 years. Sometimes it feels like 20 minutes. Sometimes we experience all 20 years in a single moment, over and over again. But we've been waiting, because we knew someone would come, someone connected to us by blood. One of the other figures, a young man who looked like he'd been a teenager when trapped, spoke for the first time. The entities promised us that family would come, that the blood connection would eventually draw the right person down here. We just didn't know it would take so long. What entities? Li Mei asked, though part of her didn't want to know. Xiaoling gestured toward the shadows above them, the ones who hunger for experience, for consciousness, for the rich complexity of sentient life. They've been waiting much longer than we have, Li Mei, and they're so very patient. Chapter 4. The Convergence. Before Li Mei could respond, Wei Ming stepped into the light from the shadows at the edge of the chamber. But he looked different, younger somehow, despite being the same age. Wei Ming, how did you get down here? I never left, he said quietly. Li Mei, I wasn't completely honest with you earlier. I didn't just randomly choose to explore this place. I've been having dreams about it my entire life. Dreams about being here, about belonging here. Li Mei studied his face, and suddenly she understood. You were one of the children. I escaped during the original ritual 20 years ago, but part of me never left. The dreams, the compulsion to come back, that was them calling me home. Them? Wei Ming gestured toward the darkness above, where vast shapes moved just beyond perception. The entities from the hungry dark, they've been patient, but their patience is ending. The convergence is happening whether we participate or not. Li Mei felt the weight of impossible responsibility settling on her shoulders. The choice wasn't just about her sister or even the trapped souls in this chamber. It was about two realities colliding, about entities beyond human comprehension seeking entrance to a world that might not survive their arrival. What do they want? She asked. To feed, her sister said simply. But not on death or pain. They feed on experience, on consciousness, on the rich complexity of sentient life. They don't want to destroy our world, they want to merge with it. And if that happens? Humanity changes, Wei Ming said. We become something new, something more, but we also stop being human in any way we currently understand. Her sister stood up slowly. Li Mei, whatever you choose, I want you to know that these 20 years haven't been suffering. We've been exploring consciousness in ways humans never could. We've seen wonders you can't imagine, and we've been preparing for this moment. Preparing how? Learning how to build bridges between realities safely. The entities from the hungry dark don't have to consume our world, they can share it. But only if the integration is done properly, with willing guides who understand both sides. Li Mei looked around the chamber one more time. At her sister, at Wei Ming, at the 23 staff members who had given their lives to protect children and ended up trapped between worlds. At the evidence of decades, possibly centuries, of rituals and ceremonies designed to facilitate something beyond human understanding. Show me how to build the bridge safely, she said. Her sister smiled, the first genuinely happy expression Li Mei had seen since entering this place. Together? Together. What followed was not the catastrophic invasion Li Mei had feared, but something far more subtle and profound. The barriers between realities didn't fall, they became permeable. The entities from the hungry dark didn't consume human consciousness, they merged with it, creating hybrid awareness that retained the best of both realities. Li Mei found herself existing simultaneously in the world above and the world below, serving as a permanent bridge between realities. Her sister and the other trapped souls were finally free to move on, but they chose to remain as guides, helping other humans adapt to expanded consciousness. Wei Ming returned to the surface changed but not lost. He began experiencing memories not just from his own interrupted childhood, but from the collective consciousness of the merged realities. The orphanage above remained abandoned, but the chambers below became a school of sorts, where selected humans could learn to navigate expanded awareness without losing their essential humanity. 6 months later, Li Mei existed in both worlds simultaneously, helping facilitate careful contact between realities while protecting both from the dangers of uncontrolled merger. Her sister, finally free from 20 years of liminal existence, chose to remain close, serving as an advisor for others facing similar choices. The world above continued largely unchanged, but those who knew how to look could see the subtle differences. Children born after the convergence showed enhanced intuitive abilities. Artists and writers began producing works that seemed to channel knowledge from beyond human experience. And in quiet places around the world, other crossing points began to activate. The integration was spreading not as invasion, but as evolution, humanity slowly becoming something larger while remaining essentially human. Li Mei's last fully human thought was simple. Her sister was safe, the children were free, and the bridge between worlds was finally built properly. Everything else was just the beginning of a larger story that would unfold over generations, as two realities learned to share space and consciousness without losing what made each of them unique. The hungry dark was no longer hungry, and the light no longer needed to fear the shadows.